The late afternoon sun spilled through the skylights of the Palmetto Plaza Mall in Miami, casting long shadows across the polished tile floor. Sarah Bennett moved with a quiet purpose, her sneakers squeaking faintly as she made her way past the food court. In her hands, she clutched a stack of fresh, missing posters, the edges crisp and uncreased unlike the faded ones she was replacing. 5 years had passed since her daughter, Emily, vanished from this very mall, but to Sarah, it felt like yesterday. The ache in her chest hadn't dulled. If anything, it had grown sharper, a constant reminder of the little girl she'd lost. Sarah stopped in front of a bulletin board near the escalators, her fingers brushing over the weathered flyer pinned there. Emily's face stared back at her 7 years old, all bright blue eyes and gap-toothed grin, her blonde curls spilling out from under a pink baseball cap. The word "missing" screamed in bold red letters above her photo, followed by the details Sarah had memorized long ago. Last seen, March 12, 2020. Palmetto Plaza Mall, Miami, Florida, wearing a yellow sundress and white sneakers. Contact Miami PD with any information. Below that, Sarah's own cell number was printed in smaller font, a lifeline she'd kept active despite the countless crank calls and dead ends. She unpinned the old flyer, folding it carefully and tucking it into her purse. It was a ritual by now, replacing the posters every few weeks, keeping Emily's face visible, refusing to let the world forget. As she smoothed the new one into place, a teenage girl walking by paused, her eyes flicking to the poster. "That is so sad," she murmured to her friend before they hurried off toward the pretzel stand. Sarah forced a tight smile, though the word stung. Sad didn't even begin to cover it. At 42, Sarah looked older than her years. The lines around her eyes and mouth weren't just from age, they were etched by grief, sleepless nights, and the relentless grind of hope warring with despair. Her dark hair, once shiny and full, was pulled back in a messy ponytail, streaked with gray she didn't bother to dye. She wore a faded denim jacket over her work polo Bennett's Brew, the logo of her small coffee shop stitched in green thread. The shop was her lifeline, keeping her afloat financially and giving her a reason to get out of bed each morning. But it was also a tether to this mall, the place where her life had shattered. As she pinned up the last corner of the poster, her mind drifted back to that day 5 years ago. It was a Thursday, the kind of sticky Miami afternoon that made you crave air conditioning. Emily had been bouncing around the apartment that morning, her little voice filling the space with chatter about a new doll she wanted from the toy store. "Please, Mommy, can I come with you today? I'll be so good, I promise," she begged, tugging at Sarah's sleeve with those tiny hands. Sarah could still feel the warmth of her daughter's fingers, the way they curled around her own. But she'd been exhausted that day. The coffee shop had been slammed with a rush of spring break tourists, and all Sarah wanted was an hour to run errands alone, grab some groceries, pick up a new filter for the espresso machine, maybe even sit for 5 minutes with a cup of coffee she didn't have to brew herself. "Not today, sweetie," she said, crouching down to meet Emily's pleading eyes. "Mommy has got a lot to do. How about you stay at Little Stars for a bit? I'll get you some ice cream after mint chocolate chip, your favorite." Emily's face had fallen, but she nodded, always the good kid, skipping off to the mall's childcare center without a fuss. Sarah shook her head, snapping back to the present as a group of kids ran past, their laughter echoing off the walls. She pressed her palm against the poster, as if she could somehow reach through it to that moment and pull Emily back. If she'd just said yes, if she'd let her tag along, the what-ifs were an endless loop in her mind, a playlist of guilt she couldn't turn off. That day, March 12, 2020, replayed itself in vivid color every time Sarah closed her eyes. She dropped Emily off at Little Stars, a brightly painted room tucked near the mall's north entrance. The staff there knew Emily well. She'd spent plenty of afternoons coloring or playing with the other kids while Sarah worked. "See you soon, baby girl," Sarah had called as Emily waved from behind a pile of Legos. The last image she had was her daughter's small hand in the air, those curls bouncing as she turned away. Sarah had finished her errands faster than expected, her arms loaded with grocery bags as she headed back to pick Emily up. She was halfway across the parking lot when the fire alarm went off, a shrill, piercing wail that sent shoppers spilling out of the mall in a chaotic wave. Her stomach dropped. She'd pushed through the crowd, heart pounding, telling herself it was just a drill, that Emily was fine. But when she reached Little Stars, the room was empty except for a frazzled staff member shouting into a walkie-talkie. She was in the bathroom. The woman had stammered when Sarah demanded answers. I turned around for 1 second, and then the alarm. The police came quickly, cordoning off the area as Sarah stood there, frozen, her grocery bags forgotten on the floor. They pulled the security footage later that night, and Sarah watched it on a grainy monitor in the mall's security office, her hands trembling in her lap. The video showed Emily skipping toward the restroom, her yellow sundress swaying. A minute later, a figure in a dark hoodie followed her, in tall, broad-shouldered, face hidden. Then the alarm sounded, and in the chaos, the same figure emerged, a small bundle in their arms, disappearing into the crowd. Emily was gone. The cops called it a targeted abduction. Whoever it was had planned it knew the mall's layout, knew how to trip the alarm, knew how to vanish. But there were no fingerprints, no clear shot of the suspect's face, no witnesses who saw anything useful. The case went cold within months, despite Sarah's pleas, despite the flyers she plastered across Miami, despite the late-night calls she made to every tip line she could find. Detective James Carter, the lead on the case, had been kind but blunt. "We're doing everything we can, Sarah, but without more evidence, it's like chasing a ghost." Now, 5 years later, Sarah stood in the same mall, the hum of shoppers, and the clatter of trays from the food court washing over her like white noise. She adjusted the strap of her purse and turned toward Bennett's Brew, her shop just a few storefronts down. It was too much a cozy nook with mismatched tables, a chalkboard menu, and a display case of pastries she baked herself, but it was hers. She'd opened it 2 years after Emily disappeared, pouring her savings into it as a way to keep going. The regulars knew her story, whispered about it over their lattes, but they never brought it up. She appreciated that. As she unlocked the door, the bell jingled, and a familiar voice called out from behind the counter. "You're late, boss. I was about to send out a search party." Maggie Torres grinned as she wiped down the espresso machine, her dark hair tied up in a bun. At 38, Maggie was Sarah's best friend and the closest thing she had to family. She'd taken over managing Little Stars after the old owner quit in the wake of Emily's disappearance, determined to make it a safer place. She'd been there that day, too, and the guilt still lingered in her eyes sometimes, though Sarah never blamed her. "Got caught up with the posters," Sarah said, dropping her purse behind the counter. Same old." Maggie nodded, her smile fading. "Anything new from Carter?" "Nope. He called last week, said he is still poking around," but Sarah trailed off, shrugging. Detective Carter had retired a year ago, but he hadn't let Emily's case go. He'd check in every few months, usually with nothing to report, just a gruff "I'm still on it, Sarah." She didn't know if he meant it or if it was just pity, but she took what she could get. Maggie poured a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "Here. On the house. You look like you need it." "Thanks." Sarah took a sip, the warmth grounding her for a moment. She glanced at the clock, 4:30 p.m. Another hour until closing, then she'd head home to her quiet apartment, scroll through the Find Emily Bennett Facebook page she'd set up, and maybe crash on the couch with a glass of cheap wine. It was the routine she'd lived for 5 years, a holding pattern she couldn't break out of. "You doing okay?" Maggie asked, leaning against the counter. "I mean, really?" Sarah hesitated. "As okay as I can be, I guess. It's been 5 years today, you know? 5 years since she didn't finish. She didn't need to." Maggie reached over and squeezed her hand. "I know. I think about her every day, too. That laugh of hers, I can still hear it sometimes, like she is right here." Sarah managed a small smile. Emily's laugh had been contagious, a high-pitched giggle that could light up a room. "Yeah. Me too." The bell jingled again, and a customer walked in, an older guy in a dolphin's cap, asking for a black coffee to go. Sarah busied herself with the order, grateful for the distraction. But as she handed him the cup, her eyes drifted to the window, to the spot where little stars sat across the concourse. The neon sign glowed faintly, a cruel reminder of the day her world stopped turning. Later that evening, after locking up the shop, Sarah sat in her beat-up Honda Civic in the mall parking lot, the engine idling. She pulled out her phone and opened the folder labeled Emily. Hundreds of photos, from her first birthday to the last picture Sarah had taken, a blurry shot of her eating a popsicle on their balcony. She scrolled to the age progression image Carter had gotten from the National Center for Missing Exploited Children last year, what Emily might look like now at 12. The face was older, sharper, but those blue eyes were the same, staring out at her like a promise she couldn't keep. She traced a finger over the screen, her throat tightening. "I'm still looking, baby girl," she whispered. "I'll never stop." The car's headlights cut through the dusk as she pulled out of the lot, the mall shrinking in her rearview mirror. Tomorrow, she'd be back pouring coffee, swapping out posters, chasing ghosts. It wasn't much of a life, but it was all she had left. For now, anyway. The fluorescent lights of Bennett's brew buzzed faintly as Sarah wiped down the counter, the smell of roasted coffee beans lingering in the air. It was a slow Thursday afternoon, the kind where the regulars trickled in and out, leaving her with too much time to think. She was halfway through restocking the sugar packets when Maggie burst through the door, her flip-flops slapping against the tile. "Okay, hear me out," Maggie said, dropping her purse on a table with a dramatic thud. "You need a break. Like a real one. Not just to lock myself in the apartment with a Netflix binge kind of break." Sarah raised an eyebrow, not looking up from the sugar packets. "I'm fine, Mags. I've got the shop to run, posters to put up." "Sarah, you're not fine," Maggie cut in, crossing her arms. "You're running on fumes. I've watched you drag yourself through this place for 5 years, and I'm not letting you spend another weekend staring at those damn flyers like they're gonna magically bring Emily back." That stung. Sarah's hand stilled, and she glanced up, meeting Maggie's determined brown eyes. "What is your big idea, then?" Maggie grinned, pulling out her phone and scrolling to a photo. "Outer Banks. My folks' beach house. It's sitting there empty, and I've got the keys. 3 days sun, sand, no mall, no coffee grinders. Just you, me, and some peace and quiet." Sarah snorted, leaning against the counter. "Peace and quiet? You? The woman who karaoke'd Sweet Caroline at 2 a.m. last 4th of July? Hey, that was a crowd pleaser." Maggie laughed, then softened her tone. "Come on, Sarah. You haven't left Miami since, well, you know. I'm worried about you. Let me drag you out of this rut, just for a weekend. Please?" Sarah hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window where little stars glowed across the concourse. The idea of leaving felt like abandoning Emily, even for a few days. But Maggie was right, she was exhausted, her bones aching from the weight of it all. Maybe a change of scenery wouldn't hurt. "What about the shop?" she asked, stalling. Luca can handle it, Maggie said, waving a hand. That kid has been begging for more hours. I'll sweet-talk him into covering your shifts. Say yes, Sarah. I'm not leaving till you do. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. Fine. 3 days. But if I come back to a burned-down coffee shop, it's on you. Maggie clapped her hands like a kid who just won a prize. Deal. Pack light, we're leaving tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up at 8. The drive to Outer Banks took 6 hours, the Florida heat giving way to the cooler, salt-tinged air of North Carolina as they crossed the state line. Maggie's beat-up Jeep rattled along Highway 12, the windows down, country music blasting from the speakers. Sarah stared out at the passing dunes, the ocean peeking through gaps in the sandy hills. It was beautiful, she had to admit, wild and untouched in a way Miami never was. But the knot in her chest didn't loosen. You're quiet, Maggie said, glancing over as she turned down the radio. What's up? Sarah shrugged, picking at a frayed thread on her jeans. Just feels weird being this far from home. From her. Maggie nodded, keeping her eyes on the road. I get it. But Emily wouldn't want you punishing yourself forever, you know? She'd want you to breathe a little. Maybe, Sarah murmured, though she was convinced. She pulled her phone from her pocket, scrolling to the Find Emily Bennett page. No new comments, no tips, just the same old condolences from strangers. She locked the screen and shoved it back in her bag. They pulled up to the beach house just past noon, a weathered 2-story cottage with peeling white paint and a wraparound porch. The sound of waves crashing drifted up from the shore, and seagulls circled overhead. Maggie hauled their bags inside, chattering about the house's quirks, the squeaky third step, the ancient fridge that hummed like a lawnmower. Sarah followed, dropping her duffel on a faded blue couch. Home sweet home, Maggie said, tossing Sarah a bottle of water from the kitchen. Wanna hit the beach? It's a 5-minute walk. Sure, Sarah said, forcing a smile. She changed into a t-shirt and shorts, grabbing her sneakers. Maybe the sand between her toes would shake loose some of the heaviness. The beach stretched out in front of them, a wide ribbon of golden sand framed by swaying sea oats. The late March sun hung low, painting the water in shades of orange and pink. A few locals dotted the shore, dog walkers, a guy with a metal detector, but it was quieter than Sarah expected, almost peaceful. She kicked off her shoes, letting the cool sand squish under her feet as Maggie led the way. They'd been walking maybe 10 minutes when Sarah noticed it. A cordoned-off section of beach up ahead, marked with white ropes, and a handful of security guards in black polos. Beyond the ropes, white chairs were lined up in neat rows, an arch draped with flowers swaying in the breeze. A wedding, she realized, small and private, the kind you'd see in a magazine spread. Fancy, Maggie said, nudging her. Bet that cost a fortune. Wonder who was tying the knot. Sarah squinted, trying to make out the figures moving around the setup. A cluster of guests milled near the arch, dressed in pastel sundresses and linen suits. Then she saw her, a girl, maybe 12 or 13, standing off to the side with an older man. She wore a simple white dress, her blonde hair pulled back in a braid. Something about her, the way she stood, the tilt of her head, sent a jolt through Sarah's chest. She froze, her breath catching. Sarah? Maggie stopped, turning back. You okay? That girl, Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She looks like Emily. Maggie followed her gaze, frowning. The one with the old guy? Come on, Sarah. It's a kid at a wedding. She's probably just. No, look closer, Sarah insisted, taking a step forward. The girl turned slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of her profile, sharp cheekbones, a familiar curve to her jaw. Then she saw it, a thin silver bracelet on the girl's wrist, glinting in the sunlight. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. She'd given Emily a bracelet just like that for her 6th birthday, engraved with tiny stars. It couldn't be a coincidence. "Sarah, hold up," Maggie said, grabbing her arm. "You're freaking me out. It's been 5 years, kids change. You can't just—" "I know what I saw," Sarah snapped, pulling free. She fumbled for her phone, hand shaking as she zoomed in, and snapped a photo. The girl was too far to see clearly, but that bracelet, I need to call Carter. Maggie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Okay, fine. But let us not jump the gun. Call him, send the picture, and we'll figure this out together." Back at the beach house, Sarah paced the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. Maggie sat on the couch, picking at a bag of chips, her eyes flicking between Sarah and the window. The line rang twice before Carter picked up, his gruff voice crackling through. "Bennett? What is going on? You sound like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Sarah said, her words tumbling out. "I'm in Outer Banks with Maggie. There's a wedding on the beach, and I saw a girl. She looks like Emily Carter. Same hair, same build, and she's wearing a bracelet like the one I gave her. I sent you a photo. Tell me I'm not crazy." A pause, then the sound of rustling papers. "Hang on, I'm pulling it up." Another beat of silence, longer this time. "Okay, I've got it. It's blurry, but yeah, there's a resemblance. The bracelet's a match, 2 stars, right?" "Yeah," Sarah breathed, her pulse racing. "Can you check it out? Run it through whatever databases you've still got access to." "I'm retired, not dead," Carter said dryly. "I've got a buddy at NCMEC who owes me a favor. Give me a couple hours." "Where exactly are you?" "Outer Banks, near Nag's Head. The wedding is at some big villa, white, 3 stories, tons of security." "Got it. Sit tight, Sarah. Don't do anything stupid till I call back." She hung up, her hand still trembling. Maggie looked up from the couch, crumbs on her shirt. "What do you say?" "He is checking it out," Sarah said, sinking into a chair. "Said it could be something." Maggie nodded, though her expression was skeptical. "Okay, but we need more than a hunch and a fuzzy photo. Let us ask around, see who owns that place. Locals always know the gossip." An hour later, they were at the Salty Bean, a little coffee shop a mile down the road. The place was a shack, really wooden walls covered in fishing nets, a chalkboard menu listing iced lattes and crab cake sandwiches. Sarah ordered a black coffee, her nerves too frayed for anything fancier, while Maggie chatted up the barista, a wiry girl in her 20s with a nose ring and a name tag that read Lila. "So, that wedding down the beach," Maggie said, leaning on the counter as Lila steamed milk. "Pretty swanky setup. Who is throwing it?" Lila smirked, pouring the milk into a cup. "Oh, that'd be the Graysons. They own half the coast around here. Big money, old money. That villa is their crown jewel. They don't show up much, but when they do, it's always some hush-hush event." "Graysons?" Sarah cut in, her voice sharper than she meant it. "Like a family?" "Yeah," Lila said, glancing at her. "Edward Grayson is the head honcho, pushing 70, I'd guess. Made a fortune in shipping, owns a bunch of cargo companies. His son Tom runs the day-to-day now. They're loaded, but kinda creepy, you know? Always got guards around, like they're hiding something." Sarah's stomach twisted. "What about kids? Do they have a daughter? Maybe 12 or 13? Lila shrugged, wiping her hands on a towel. "Not sure. They're real private, don't exactly invite the neighbors over for barbecue. But I've seen a girl around there sometimes, blonde, quiet. Stays close to the old man." Sarah exchanged a look with Maggie, her mind racing. "Thanks," she said, sliding a tip across the counter. "Appreciate it." Outside, the sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows over the dunes. Maggie kicked at the sand as they walked back to the Jeep. Grayson's, huh? Sounds like a real peach of a family. What is the plan? I don't know yet, Sarah admitted, clutching her coffee cup. But if that girl is Emily, I'm not leaving till I find out. Maggie sighed, unlocking the car. All right, Nancy drew. Let us wait for Carter's call, then figure out how to crash a wedding without getting arrested. Carter called back just as the sky turned purple, the beach house glowing with the warm light of a single lamp. Sarah snatched up her phone, her heart in her throat. What do you find? It's not definitive, Carter said, his tone cautious. My guy ran the photo through facial recognition, got a partial match to Emily's age progression image. About 60% probability. The bracelet's a stronger link, though same design, same engraving. Could be a coincidence, but it might not be, Sarah finished, gripping the phone tighter. What about the Graysons? Working on it, he said. Edward Grayson's a big fish, owns Grayson Maritime, big player in East Coast shipping. No criminal record, but there's chatter rumors of shady deals, tax evasion, nothing solid. I'm digging deeper. You sure about this wedding? Dead sure, Sarah said. It's tomorrow afternoon. I saw her, Carter. I know it's her. A long sigh crackled through the line. All right. I'm driving up tonight, be there by morning. We'll scope it out together. But Sarah, promise me you won't go charging in alone. These people don't mess around. I won't, she lied, hanging up before he could argue. She turned to Maggie, who was sprawled on the couch with a beer. He's coming. Thinks it could be her. Maggie sat up, eyes wide. Seriously? Okay, what is the play? We can't just waltz up and say, hey, mind if we borrow your kid? No, Sarah said, pacing again. But I need to see her up close. If I can talk to her, hear her voice, I'll know. Maggie groaned, setting the beer down. This is insane, you know that, right? We're talking about sneaking into a billionaire's wedding. What if they've got, like, attack dogs or something? Then we'll deal with it, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her head. I've waited 5 years, Mags. I'm not letting this slip away. The next morning, the beach was alive with activity. Delivery vans rumbled past the house, dropping off flowers and catering supplies for the Grayson wedding. Sarah stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the guards patrol the perimeter. Maggie joined her, binoculars dangling around her neck. Borrowed these from my dad's fishing gear, Maggie said, handing them over. Take a look. Sarah peered through the lenses, focusing on the villa. The girl was there again, standing on a balcony with the older man, Edward Grayson, she assumed. She was closer now, her features clearer. Those blue eyes, that bracelet, Sarah's breath hitched. It's her, she whispered. I'd bet my life on it. Maggie took the binoculars back, squinting. Okay, I'll give you the eyes. But we need a plan. Carter's still an hour out. What's our move? Sarah set her mug down, determination hardening her voice. We get closer. Blend in with the staff or something. I just need 5 minutes with her. Maggie stared at her, then laughed a nervous, incredulous sound. You're gonna get us thrown in jail, Bennett. But fine. Let us crash a wedding. The sun hung high over Outer Banks, its midday glare bouncing off the sand as Sarah and Maggie crouched behind a cluster of sea oats, the Grayson villa looming ahead. The wedding preparations were in full swing, caterers hauling trays of shrimp cocktails, florists fussing over the arch, and security guards pacing the perimeter like hawks. Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears, her binoculars trained on the balcony where she'd last seen the girl she was certain was Emily. She's not up there now, Sarah muttered, lowering the binoculars. They must have moved her inside. Maggie adjusted her baseball cap, sweat beading on her forehead. Yeah, well, we're not exactly dressed for crashing a black tie event. How do we even get past those goons? Sarah glanced at the delivery vans parked near the Villa's side entrance. A guy in a white polo was unloading crates of wine, his clipboard tucked under his arm. We don't crash, she said, nodding toward him. We blend in. Grab a tray or something, act like we belong. Maggie groaned, rubbing her temples. You're gonna owe me so many beers for this. Fine, let us scope it out. They slipped down the dune, sticking to the shadows of the beachfront shrubs. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen, mingling with the faint tang of champagne wafting from the wedding site. Sarah's stomach churned, part fear, part adrenaline, but she pushed it down. This was her shot, maybe her only one. They reached the vans just as the delivery guy ducked back inside one. Sarah spotted a stack of folded aprons on a crate and grabbed two, tossing one to Maggie. Put this on. Keep your head down. Maggie fumbled with the strings, muttering under her breath. If I end up in handcuffs, I'm telling him this was your idea. Deal, Sarah said, tying her own apron. She snatched a tray of empty glassware from the crate, balancing it like she'd seen the caterers do. Follow my lead. They shuffled toward the side entrance, where a guard with a buzz cut and a walkie-talkie eyed them. Sarah forced a bored expression, channeling every ounce of coffee shop nonchalance she had. Glasses for the bar, she said, jerking her head at the tray. The guard squinted, then waved them through. Hurry up. Ceremony is starting soon. Sarah's heart leapt as they stepped inside. The villa was a maze of polished wood and glass-high ceilings, chandeliers glinting like ice, and walls lined with abstract art that probably cost more than her apartment. Staff buzzed around, setting tables with crisp linens and silverware. She scanned the room, searching for any sign of the girl. Over there, Maggie hissed, nudging her toward a hallway branching off the main foyer. Stairs. If she is anywhere, it's probably up there. They ditched the tray on a side table and slipped into the hall, their sneakers silent on the hardwood. The hum of wedding chatter faded behind them, replaced by the distant crash of waves through an open window. Sarah's breath came shallow as they climbed the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. At the top, a long corridor stretched out, doors lining both sides. Which one? Maggie whispered, her voice tight. Sarah didn't answer. She moved on instinct, stopping at the third door on the right. A faint sound, like a muffled hum, came from inside. She pressed her ear to the wood, her pulse roaring. Someone's in there. Before Maggie could protest, Sarah turned the knob. It was unlocked. She pushed the door open, stepping into a dimly lit room with heavy curtains drawn over the windows. A single lamp glowed on a nightstand, casting shadows across a four-poster bed. And there, sitting cross-legged with a book in her lap, was the girl. Sarah froze. The blonde braid, the white dress, the bracelet, it was her. Older, taller, but those blue eyes, they were Emily's. The girl looked up, startled, her book slipping to the floor. Who are you? She asked, her voice small but clear. It hit Sarah like a punch, higher now, but with that same lilting cadence she'd heard 1,000 times in her dreams. Emily, Sarah breathed, stepping forward. Her knees wobbled, tears stinging her eyes. It's me. It's Mom. The girl's brow furrowed, confusion flickering across her face. My name is Clara. I don't. She stopped, tilting her head. Do I know you? Sarah's heart cracked. 5 years they'd taken her name, her memories. She knelt in front of her, reaching out but stopping short. You're Emily Bennett. I'm your mom. You went missing from a mall in Miami 5 years ago. That bracelet, you remember it, don't you? I gave it to you for your birthday. The girl Emily glanced at the silver band on her wrist, her fingers brushing the tiny stars. I don't know. They told me I've always been here. That I'm Clara Grayson. They lied, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You're my daughter. I've been looking for you every day since you were gone. Maggie stepped closer, her eyes wide. Sarah, we gotta move. Someone's gonna notice we're missing. Emily's gaze darted between them, uncertainty warring with something deeper recognition, maybe. I don't understand. Grandpa Ed, he said. Grandpa Ed? Sarah's stomach dropped. Edward Grayson? Emily nodded, clutching the book tighter. He takes care of me. Before Sarah could process that, footsteps thudded in the hall. She whipped around as the door swung open, revealing a tall man in a crisp suit, dark hair, sharp jaw, mid-30s. Tom Grayson, she guessed, from Lila's description. His eyes narrowed, taking in the scene. Who the hell are you? He snapped, his hand reaching for a phone in his pocket. Clara, get behind me. She's not Clara, Sarah said, standing and stepping between him and Emily. She's my daughter, and I'm taking her home. Tom's face darkened, a smirk tugging at his lips. You're delusional. Security. He barked into the phone. Second floor now. Maggie grabbed Sarah's arm. Time to go. No. Sarah yanked free, turning to Emily. Sweetie, come with me. Please, I'll explain everything. Emily hesitated, her eyes locked on Sarah's. Then, slowly, she slid off the bed, clutching her book like a shield. Okay, she whispered. Tom lunged, but Sarah shoved him back, adrenaline surging. Run! She yelled, grabbing Emily's hand. They bolted for the door, Maggie leading the way as shouts echoed behind them. Guards pounded up the stairs, their radios crackling. Sarah's lungs burned as they raced down the hall, Emily's small hand tight in hers. Back door. Maggie shouted, veering toward a service exit. They burst outside, the salty air hitting them as they stumbled onto the beach. The wedding guests turned, startled, as guards poured out after them. Sarah's phone buzzed Carter. She answered, panting. We've got her. Beach now. 5 minutes out, he barked. Hold on. They sprinted along the shore, sand kicking up behind them. Emily stumbled, but Sarah pulled her upright, her heart pounding with a mix of terror and triumph. She'd found her. After 5 years, she'd found her. Night fell fast, the villa's lights glowing like a predator's eyes as Sarah, Maggie, and Emily huddled in a thicket of dunes a half-mile down the beach. Carter's truck roared up minutes later, his grizzled face tight with urgency as he jumped out. Jesus, Sarah, you couldn't wait? He growled, ushering them into the cab. Emily clung to Sarah, trembling. She's here, Sarah said, her voice fierce. That's all that matters. Carter glanced at Emily, his expression softening. All right, kiddo. You're safe now. Let us get you out of here. They peeled out, tires spitting gravel, but headlights flared behind them, 2 black SUVs, closing fast. Grayson's goons, Carter muttered, flooring it. Buckle up. The chase tore through the winding roads of Outer Banks, the ocean a dark blur on their left. Sarah held Emily close, whispering reassurances as the girl stared wide-eyed out the window. It's okay, baby. I've got you. One SUV rammed their tailgate, jolting them forward. Carter cursed, swerving onto a side road. Call 911, Maggie. Maggie fumbled her phone, her voice shaking as she shouted their location to the dispatcher. The second SUV pulled alongside, a guard leaning out with a flashlight, yelling for them to pull over. Carter yanked the wheel, forcing them off the road into a ditch. Sirens wailed in the distance, red and blue lights flashing as police cars screeched into view. The SUVs hesitated, then peeled away, disappearing into the night. Sarah exhaled, her arms tightening around Emily. Carter slumped back, wiping sweat from his brow. Too damn close. They spent the night at a small police station in Nag's Head, the fluorescent lights harsh against the peeling paint. Emily sat curled in Sarah's lap, silent but awake, her book still clutched in her hands. Carter and Maggie gave their statements to a tired-looking officer, while Sarah stayed with Emily, stroking her hair. A social worker arrived, Ellen Price, a soft-spoken woman with gray streaks in her bun. "We'll need to verify her identity," she said gently. "DNA records?" "But she can stay with you tonight, Sarah." Sarah nodded, too drained to argue. She looked down at Emily, who finally spoke. "They told me my mom was dead," she whispered. "That I didn't have anyone." "They lied," Sarah said, tears spilling over. "I never stopped looking for you." Emily's lip trembled, and she buried her face in Sarah's shoulder. "I'm scared." "I know," Sarah murmured. "But I'm here now. We're gonna be okay." The next morning, Carter pulled Sarah aside, while Maggie grabbed coffee from the station's ancient machine. "Got some intel from my NCMC guy," he said, his voice low. "Grayson's dirty suspected of trafficking kids through his shipping routes. No proof till now, but Emily's a start. We found papers in the villa, fake IDs, adoption records." "She wasn't the first." Sarah's stomach lurched. "What about Edward?" "In custody," Carter said. "His son, too. They're clamming up, lawyering up, but the evidence is piling. We'll get him." She nodded, glancing at Emily, who was nibbling a donut Ellen had brought. "She doesn't remember much. They've messed with her head." "Give her time," Carter said. "She is tough like her mom." Back at the beach house, Sarah sat with Emily on the porch, the ocean stretching out before them. The villa was a crime scene now, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. Maggie joined them, plopping down with a sigh. "So," she said, nudging Sarah, "still think this trip was a bad idea?" Sarah laughed, a real, shaky laugh, the first in years. "You're insufferable." "Yeah, but you love me," Maggie grinned, then sobered. "She is really back, huh?" "Yeah," Sarah said, pulling Emily closer. "She is." Emily looked up, her blue eyes clearer now. "Can we go home soon?" "Soon," Sarah promised, kissing her forehead. "Real soon." 6 months had passed since that chaotic night in Outer Banks, and the Miami sun blazed down on the Dade County Courthouse, its concrete steps swarming with reporters. Sarah Bennett sat in the front row of the courtroom, her hands clasped tight in her lap, the hum of the air conditioning doing little to ease the sweat prickling her neck. Emily sat beside her, her blonde hair pulled into a neat ponytail, her small hand gripping Sarah's, like it had every day since they'd come home. The wooden benches creaked as the gallery filled journalists, curious locals, and a handful of parents from Sarah's missing kids support group, all waiting for the same thing, justice. Across the room, Edward Grayson sat at the defense table, his silver hair slicked back, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the orange jumpsuit he'd worn in lockup. He didn't look at Sarah, his cold gray eyes fixed on the judge's bench. His son, Tom, sat beside him, fidgeting with his tie, his jaw tight. The Grayson legal team, a pack of sharp-eyed attorneys in $1,000 suits, huddled around them, whispering strategy. Sarah's stomach twisted. These people had money, power, connections. Could they really buy their way out of this? Maggie squeezed in on Sarah's other side, her floral dress a splash of color against the courtroom's drab beige. "They're sweating," she whispered, nodding at Tom. "Look at him. He knows they're screwed." Sarah managed a thin smile. "Hope you're right." Detective Carter slid into the row behind them, his rumpled jacket brushing the bench. "They've got no wiggle room," he muttered, leaning forward. "Evidence is airtight, those papers from the villa, The bodyguard's confession, Emily's DNA. They're done. Sarah nodded, though the knot in her chest didn't loosen. She'd heard the rundown a dozen times. Raul Martinez, one of Edward's hired muscle, had cracked under questioning, spilling everything how he'd stalked little stars for weeks, bribed a janitor to trip the fire alarm, sedated Emily with a cloth soaked in chloroform, and smuggled her out in a duffel bag. How Edward had hand-picked her from photos Raul sent, part of a sick pattern stretching back decades. The Villa raid turned up forged documents, birth certificates, adoption papers for Emily, and at least 3 other kids, all tucked away in a hidden safe. It was damning, but the Graysons had deep pockets and deeper arrogance. She wouldn't believe it was over until the gavel fell. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. All rise for the Honorable Judge Carla Rivera. Sarah stood, pulling Emily up with her. The judge, a stern woman with a gray bob and wire-rimmed glasses, swept in, her black robe rustling. Be seated, she said, her tone clipped. We're here for the sentencing of Edward Grayson and Thomas Grayson on charges of kidnapping, child trafficking, and falsification of records. Counsel, are you ready to proceed? The prosecutor, a wiry guy named Daniel Ortiz with a reputation for tenacity, stood. Yes, Your Honor. The state calls Sarah Bennett to the stand. Sarah's breath hitched. She'd known this was coming, her victim impact statement, but her legs still felt like jelly as she walked to the witness box. Emily's eyes followed her, wide and trusting, and Sarah clung to that as she swore in. Mrs. Bennett, Ortiz began, his voice steady, can you tell the court what the last 5 years have been like for you? Sarah swallowed, her throat dry. It's been hell, she said, her voice cracking but firm. My daughter, Emily, was taken from me when she was 7. I spent every day looking for her, putting up flyers, checking tips, praying for a miracle. I didn't sleep, didn't eat right, didn't live. I just existed, waiting for her. And these men, she pointed at Edward and Tom, her hand trembling, they stole her. They locked her away, changed her name, told her I was dead. They took 5 years of her life, of our life, and I'll never get that back. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. Edward's face stayed blank, but Tom shifted, his eyes darting to the floor. Sarah pressed on. Emily's home now, but she is not the same. She has nightmares, jumps at loud noises, asks me every day if they're coming back. That's what they did to her, to us. I'm asking you, Judge, to make sure they can't do it to anyone else. Ortiz nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Bennett. No further questions. The defense attorney, a slick guy named Howard Klein, stood, smoothing his tie. Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry for your ordeal, but isn't it possible your daughter's memories are unreliable after so long? That she might be wandered off that day, and my client simply took her in? Sarah's fists clenched. Wandered off? She was 7, in a locked childcare center. Your clients had her drugged and smuggled out. Don't twist this. Klein smirked, unfazed. No further questions, Your Honor. Sarah returned to her seat, her pulse pounding. Emily leaned into her, whispering, You did good, Mom. Thanks, sweetie, Sarah murmured, kissing her forehead. The sentencing dragged on, hours of legal back and forth, expert testimony, Raul's tearful plea deal, confession played on a grainy video. Edward got life without parole, Tom, 25 years. When the gavel finally banged, a cheer rippled through the gallery. Sarah exhaled, tears spilling as Maggie hugged her tight. They're gone, Maggie said, her voice thick. You did it. We did it, Sarah corrected, pulling Emily into the embrace. Carter clapped her shoulder, a rare grin breaking through his gruff exterior. Outside, the reporters swarmed, microphones thrusting forward. Mrs. Bennett, how do you feel about the verdict? One shouted. Sarah shielded Emily, her voice steady. Relieved? It's not over. Emily S. got a long road, but it's a start. Justice matters. Back in Miami, life settled into a fragile new normal. The apartment felt alive again, Emily S. laughter echoing off the walls as she sprawled on the couch with a coloring book. Sarah quit Bennett S. brew too many memories tied to the mall and started freelancing as a baker, selling cakes and cookies from home. It was too much, but it kept them afloat, and it meant she could be there when Emily needed her. The first few weeks were rough. Emily woke screaming most nights, her small body shaking as Sarah held her, whispering, "You're safe, baby. I'm here." They saw a therapist twice a week, Dr. Lisa Chin, a gentle woman with a knack for getting Emily to open up. She'd draw pictures of the villa, of Grandpa Ed, her crayons pressing hard enough to tear the paper. "He said I was special," she told Dr. Chin once, her voice flat. "That I had to stay with him forever." Sarah's heart broke every time, but she hid it, focusing on the small victories. Emily's first smile at a bad knock-knock joke, the way she'd hum while helping Sarah frost cupcakes. One afternoon, as they sat on the balcony with a plate of chocolate chip cookies, Emily looked up, her blue eyes clear. "Do you think they'll all get out?" she asked, crumbling a cookie in her hands. "No," Sarah said firmly. "They're locked up for good. And even if they tried, I'd fight 'em tooth and nail." "You're stuck with me, kiddo." Emily giggled, a sound Sarah hadn't heard in years. "Promise?" "Promise." Carter dropped by one Sunday, a six-pack of beer in hand. They sat in the living room, Emily napping on the couch under a quilt Sarah's mom had made. "Case is closed," he said, cracking open a can. Feds raided Grayson Maritime, found records of at least a dozen kids shipped overseas. Edward was the ringleader, but Tom knew plenty. They're digging up more victims now. Sarah took a sip, the cold bitterness grounding her. "How do you get away with it so long?" "Money," Carter grunted. "Bribes, shell companies, fake charities." He had half the coast in his pocket. "But you cracked it open, Sarah." Emily asked the key. "They can't bury this anymore." She glanced at her daughter, curled up with a stuffed bunny Maggie had bought her. "She has more than a key. She has everything." Carter nodded, a flicker of something soft in his eyes. "You're a hell of a mom, Bennett. Don't forget that." Months turned into a year, and the nightmares faded, not gone, but quieter. Emily started sixth grade, nervous but excited, her backpack slung over one shoulder as Sarah walked her to the bus stop. "You'll be okay," Sarah said, smoothing her hair. "You're tougher than you think." "Like you?" Emily asked, grinning. "Exactly like me." That evening, Maggie came over with pizza and a stack of board games. They played Monopoly till midnight, Emily giggling as she bankrupted them both with hotels on Boardwalk. "You're a shark," Maggie teased, tossing a pepperoni at her. "Where do you learn that?" "Mom taught me," Emily said, sticking out her tongue. Sarah laughed, the sound lighter than it'd been in years. Later, as Maggie crashed on the couch and Emily brushed her teeth, Sarah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the Miami skyline. The city glittered, a sprawl of lights against the dark, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a cage. She'd fought through grief, through fear, through a system that almost let the Graysons win, and she'd come out the other side. Not whole, not yet, but closer. Emily patted in, her pajamas dotted with stars. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she asked, her voice small. "Always," Sarah said, scooping her up. They climbed into bed, Emily's head nestled against her shoulder, her breathing slowing as she drifted off. Sarah lay awake, listening to the soft rhythm, the weight of her daughter tethered to something real. The road ahead was easy. Court appeals loomed, therapy stretched on, and some wounds might never heal. But they had each other, and that was enough. The Graysons had taken 5 years, but they couldn't take this. A mother and daughter, battered but unbroken, rebuilding under the Florida sun.